Adults at the start of the 1990s, what were those years really like? I was 18 in 1990, so I guess I just barely count. For me, it was pretty much the best time of my life. I was young, I was doing computer crap at the best time ever to be doing computer crap. I jumped straight into the workforce out of high school doing C and later Java. I was going to be part of some ridiculous startup and end up a billionaire by the time I was 28. Didn't work out, of course, but it was still a good time. I had a lot of fun, worked with a lot of cool people, never really had to worry about anything. Everything was just going to keep getting better and better.
It sounds like you had a solid experience back then. Getting into computers when everything was taking off must have felt great. The idealism of that age is something a lot of people can relate to. It's interesting how many of us thought we'd find success right away. Those carefree moments working with friends, though, seem to have shaped your perspective. Even if things didn't go as planned, it seems like you still hold on to that nostalgia.
I was 29 in 1990, and so was a full-fledged grown-up at that point. For me, that decade was about unimagined financial possibilities. Real estate boomed. The stock market boomed. The job market boomed. Women had much greater ability to progress in the job market. Any idiot could start a tech company and make piles of money. While we all knew that it wouldn't last forever, we were pretty certain that it was going to be the best decade of our lives. In short, it was amazing.
That sounds like a wild time. I can imagine the excitement of diving into that real estate and stock market. Everyone chasing those opportunities, feeling like anything was possible. It's crazy how quickly things can change, though. Looking back, I bet a lot of people didn't realize how good they had it. Sounds like a decade of hustle and some serious gains. Good times for sure.
You know how cool nerd shit is now? Comics, video games, fantasy in general? While I was in middle/high school, it wasn't cool. I suffered from my interests. I'm ecstatic that the culture has shifted enough that the things I like are now more or less accepted, and I can openly enjoy Magic the Gathering, video game music, and Ghostbusters paraphernalia without getting sucker punched in the head.
Yeah, I remember those days. Back in school, you'd get teased for liking those things. I kept my love for video games and comics under wraps. It's kinda wild how that all changed. Now you see people rocking shirts of their favorite games and shows everywhere. I can finally talk about Magic or binge-watch Ghostbusters without worrying about judgment. It's nice to see the shift.
Greenspan said it best. Irrational exuberance stocks were going up, jobs in my profession, software engineering, were plentiful, recruiters constantly called, companies offered bonuses for finding new workers, pundits wrote books about the end of scarcity and coming age of plenty. I was working at the best job ever for the best boss with the best team, on most fun projects, and getting paid very well. I was 37 in 1990.
It's interesting how things can change so quickly. I remember feeling similar vibes back in the tech boom. Everyone was optimistic, and there was a sense of stability. I had a good job too, great team, and everything seemed to click. You get comfortable, thinking it'll last. Then, shifts happen, and that confidence can fade fast. It's a reminder that markets and life can be unpredictable.
What I remember the most were the cars. An entire decade of boring, bland, cookie-cutter designs with zero style. Seriously, look at the Mustang, Corvette, Tempo, Taurus, Accord, etc. From those years, every car manufacturer, except for the ultra-expensive ones of course, were guilty of following each other into a long, boring loop of generic humdrum. This was also the decade when the internet evolved into a powerhouse. It started with crappy BBSs where you could download free stuff like games and pictures, the cheap and overly sensitive WIN modems, and their squawking handshakes over dial-up. Shareware blew our minds too. Free games. If we like it, we just have to pay a few dollars to unlock the whole thing. Then came MUDs and web pages and instant chat, ICQ, faster and faster speeds. Every year it just got better and better, and close to the end of the decade, MP3s. That was the most impactful thing of the 90s. MP3s and the music revolution that it started.
I remember those car designs too. It felt like you couldn't tell one model from another. But the internet boom was wild. I spent hours on BBS, slowly downloading games. The noise of dial-up still sticks with me. It's crazy how fast everything changed. MUDs and chat rooms felt revolutionary. And then MP3s hit, changing the way we listened to music forever. It was a whole new world back then.
I was in my 40s for that decade. The only thing I remember is that I retired from the US Navy, my first wife left me, and my daughter launched herself into adulthood. Mostly what makes any given decade interesting to a person is the milestones they collected. If you set nostalgia aside, then most decades are basically the same. The US is fighting someone somewhere, sometimes ourselves at home. We are whining about the national debt, the cost of living, the do-nothing Congress, and many other things. And if our lives are hard right now, we long to have the good old days back. Except they really weren't any better than they are now. Anything in the past is just a memory or a memory of a memory. We take a few facts and dress them up in pretty or ugly clothes in our mind's eye. Then we cling to the superstition that who we are today is some of our experiences. Remembering is fun, and it doesn't mean anything about today, and even less about tomorrow.
It's interesting to reflect on decades like that. I can relate to the idea that milestones shape our memories. My friend went through similar changes. His kids grew up, he changed jobs, and he often comments on how we romanticize the past. Life's ups and downs just seem to blend together over the years. The nostalgia hits hard, but he's learned that each day has its own value, regardless of what came before.
I don't know about the West, but Eastern Europe was crap. Everyone was poor, money was losing its value every day, every public servant demanded a bribe, jobs were hard to come by, and when you would get one, they were overworking and underpaying you. But it was also a time of possibility. Due to the legal chaos, you could do whatever you wanted.
It's interesting how tough times can bring out both the worst and the best in people. Despite the struggles, there was a sort of freedom that came with the chaos. People found ways to navigate the system, bend the rules, and create their own opportunities. It's a reminder that even in challenging circumstances, there can be a sense of resilience and creativity that emerges.
I was 20 years old in 1990. First off, you have to look at the 90s as kind of like two separate times. The early 90s, like up to 1993, was very similar to the 80s. A lot of the clothes and the look and the music and stuff was still residual 80s looking things. Around 1993, when Nirvana and those type of bands emerged, things started to change to a more hard rock influenced cultural twist. I think back now of how music on the radio was rock music and had guitars and a do-it-yourself GarageBand attitude. I just don't see that anymore with today's music. I see it as cheap computer-laden, shallow, empty message. The 90s were overall a time when the message of independence was a little more true and real than today.
I get what you mean about the 90s. There was definitely a shift in music and culture during that time. I remember how bands like Nirvana shaped the vibe, bringing in that raw, unfiltered sound. It felt more genuine back then, with real messages behind the music. Nowadays, it does feel different, like a lot of it is just manufactured. It's interesting to think about how those changes have affected what we listen to.
Well, if you knew anything about computers, there were pretty good times to be in a workplace. There was virtually no security, and what there was easy to bypass. Most everyone in a management position had no idea WTF was going on. So if you knew computers, you were viewed as some kind of wizard. I got raises and promotions based pretty much on cheesy desktop publishing results and working 1 hour a day while surfing the brand new web the other 7. It was also a time when I made serious money building PCs on the side, before they were available at every Walmart for a few $100.
Yeah, I can relate. Back in the day, I had a friend who was really into building computers. He would charge people a decent amount to put together rigs. Everyone was impressed, and he ended up getting some freelance gigs just because he knew his stuff. Those were good times when tech was still a bit of a mystery. We spent hours just tinkering and browsing, not worried about any of the security stuff that came later.
Grunge gets all the hype, but those of us in flyover states were listening to Garth Brooks and country. It took a Morissette to cross us over into rock. Prefab Star, with her songs written by Glenn Ballard, turned us onto the authenticity of rock. Ironic, don't you think? The current outrage over SJWs is a carbon copy of the political correct backlash of the early 90s. Politically correct bedtime stores dominated the bestseller lists then. Back then, it seemed like marriage and families would die out. Packing up and shacking up was all we wanted to do. Everyone had a novel in the drawer or a gig at a coffee shop and planned to live for their art. The whole child boom truly surprised me. Watch while we're young. Noah Baumbach handles this theme well.
I get what you're saying. Growing up in the Midwest, country music was all around, but Alanis hit differently. It was like she opened a door for us. That whole art scene back then, everyone chasing dreams, felt real. It was a mix of hope and confusion. While we're young, hits that vibe perfectly, showing how life can change. Some of us wanted the raw stuff, but we still found our paths.
When I graduated college in 1993, the economy was fairly crappy. I did a lot of real scut work, including telemarketing and shift manager at a pizza place. Within 5 years, though, anybody who could work a computer and lived in a major metropolitan area could get a good-paying office job. It was cool to see the internet go from Usenet to AOL chat rooms. I worked at AOL for 6 months as a temp, to the web, and the economy go from recession to in 10 years we should be able to pay off the national debt.
It's interesting how things change over time. Starting out doing tough jobs like telemarketing and managing a pizza place wasn't easy. But watching the internet evolve and seeing opportunities open up must have felt rewarding. It's wild how quickly tech shapes the job market. From struggling to finding decent office work in just a few years is a huge shift. The economy really went through a lot in that decade.
Got to see all the good bands and had to go into a ticket office and buy a ticket. Nirvana, for example, or Public Enemy. Internet was very limited and you weren't able to use the landline phone at the same time. Long-distance relationships meant writing a letter. If you wanted to show your friend a photo you'd taken, you had to have the film developed first.
Those days were simple. I remember going to the ticket office to see bands like Nirvana. No online tickets, just standing in line. Keeping in touch meant writing letters and waiting for replies. It felt more personal. Sharing photos was a hassle too, waiting to get the film developed. It's funny how much things have changed with technology. Sometimes I miss that slow pace, but I guess progress is inevitable.
For America, the future looked bright. The Soviet Union was gone, so no Cold War. We'd heard for a decade Japan was going to beat us economically, but Japan had stalled. The US was on top. Politically, the USS was turning ugly. Everything was political and an attack. The rep/dem divdo was growing.
It's interesting to think about how things changed after the Cold War. Back then, a lot of people felt optimistic with the US being at the forefront. Now, it's hard to avoid the constant political battles. I remember a friend saying it felt like everyone was picking sides more than ever. It's like every conversation became a debate. Looking back, you realize how quickly things can shift in society.
The NBA was at its greatest. Shaq and Penny Jordan and Pippen Clyde and Hakeem Kemp, and Peyton Ewing and Starks Johnson and Bogues Barkleyan, Malone and Stockton Robinson, and Avery, great players and personalities. And NBA Live 95 for Sega was probably the greatest video game ever created.
I used to play NBA Live 95 all the time with my friends. We'd pick our favorite teams and just go at it for hours. I remember going back and forth with a buddy, trading wins. Shaq was unbeatable, but I always tried to use smaller players to shake things up. It's wild how those memories stick with you, just a simple game turning into some fun moments.
I became an adult in the mid-90s. I thought making money was going to be easy, and all I had to do was go to college, and I would be making great money and find a job of my choice because that is how it was. I saw older friends move from job to job after high school, making more and more money. Things just seemed to be so good for everyone, and as long as you got an education or learn a trade, you would have your job, be able to buy a house, and live the American dream. After September 11th, this all came crashing down, and things have been a struggle since.
It's funny how we have these ideas about life when we're younger. Growing up, I thought that getting an education would set everything in place. I watched friends climb the ladder and I figured I'd be fine too. But then, like you said, things hit hard after September 11th. It felt like one day everything was stable and the next it all changed. Makes you rethink what you thought was a given.
The 90s and my 20s, from my vantage, the 90s were optimistic. We just came off the first Gulf War. The wall came down. Rodney King was gonna shed light on police violence. Bigotry was going to be over soon. God was dead again. And my personal hobby, computers, was about to take over the world. All my friends actually did hang out at a coffee shop. When Kurt died, the record store played Weird Al's parody when being interviewed by the local news. While there were a few broken-hearted people, most people made fun of the death. Then years later got sappy about it. 2,600 meetings were awesome. Computers. I was going to end up being a blue-collar worker, and I respect blue-collar workers. I was a welder, lost my job, got a contact job at G doing help desk, and that was that. A poor dropout was now making middle-class wagers. And man, sex, it just kind of flowed like it was on tap. Music. White people stopped hating black artists compared to the 80s. Diversity training. Those were the best years for me.
The 90s felt like a good time. Everyone was just hanging out, and there was a sense of hope. I remember chilling at the coffee shop with friends, talking about music and life. When Kurt Cobain died, it was a mix of sadness and jokes. My journey from a welder to helping with tech support felt like a win. Those years were simple, busy, and carefree. Just good times, really.
My dad told me that the 90s were not kind to him. First, he was in a job that paid well, but had a commute of over an hour each way, and his boss was a complete prick who had all employees with young kids because he knew they needed the job, so he could treat his employees like shit and they wouldn't quit on him. Then he finally got laid off from that job, so money was a bit tight until he found his next job. My parent did very well hiding the money problems from the kids. The only thing that I noticed differently from that time was that we couldn't have the Disney Channel for a while. The whole time my parents were essentially in a Cold War. They never really fought, but they never really did anything together either. I asked my mom why she slept on the couch instead of in her bedroom, and she said that she liked watching Jay Leno, but she'd fall asleep partway through the show. In retrospect, it was because their marriage was falling apart. So all in all, my dad said it was a very stressful decade for him.
It sounds like your dad went through a tough time. Long commutes and a bad boss can really drain you. It's interesting how parents manage to hide financial struggles from their kids. The tension in the house must have been hard to miss, even if you didn't fully understand it back then. The couch thing is a subtle hint about what was really going on. The 90s definitely had their challenges for him.
I'm a Gen Zer, so I went from my teens to adulthood in the 90s. Overall, there was a sense that they ruined it. I remember thinking there was limitless potential. Computers were exploding, experimenting with VR rigs. The net was exploding. There was no darknet. It was all just there, you just had to know how to look. Not that that's really changed, but there was a sense of pride in knowing that the fear they pumped out was unfounded. It was commercialized to hell and gone.IPO after IPO and boom gone. Felt like Icarus.
I get what you mean. Growing up in that era felt different. It was all about discovery, and then it turned into this big business game. I remember the excitement of the internet too, like we were on the brink of something huge. But then it got flooded with ads and corporate agendas. It's like we saw the future and then watched it get boxed up. A real letdown in some ways.
Music-wise, everyone talks about alternative and rap, but the big story was country. Garth Brooks was huge, and country bars and radio stations sprang up cities that previously had very little interest. The funny thing is that a lot of the 80s headbangers, rather than get into the new alt stuff, put on cowboy hats and learned to line dance. Which may have been smart. That's where the girls were.
I remember hanging out with some friends back then. We all used to listen to rock and metal, but then country music blew up. It was weird seeing my buddies trading their band tees for cowboy hats. We'd end up at those country bars, trying to line dance. It felt odd, but hey, it worked. You could always count on meeting new people there. Sometimes you gotta adapt, right?
Cynicism and being burned out and above it all was the default mode. It was culture's way of rejecting the excesses of the 80s, but damn did it get old fast. As much as the everything is awesome aesthetic of the 10s sometimes grates, it's a lot more fun than the whole caring about stuff is lame thing. Edited to add, I do miss the big, bulky jackets and sweaters phase of early 90s hip-hop fashion. Pre-Hammer Pants and pre-The Chronic.
That vibe makes sense. I remember my friend always dressing in those big jackets back in the day. We thought it was so cool, and it just felt different from what everyone else wore. Then came the more cynical styles, and it felt like everyone just got tired of trying to be cool. But now, seeing how fashion keeps changing, I kind of miss that carefree attitude too. It's simpler, you know?
I was in my 20s, so of course it was a good time. A lot of people kind of glorified / fetishized having nothing and living on as little as possible and having as few possessions as possible. Everything looked like shit at the beginning of the decade. Cities were falling apart, everything was ugly and dirty and full of trash. By the end of the decade, cities and colleges were getting very shiny and full of fancy stuff and too expensive for regular people. Everything was DIY, and in my memory, everyone was kind of uniform shade of khaki / brown.
Sounds like a time of contrast. Starting off rough, but then things got polished, which is kind of interesting. That DIY vibe made everyone blend in, but it's cool how people found a way to make it work with little. The change from decay to something more vibrant says a lot about resilience and adaptation. It's strange how a whole decade can shift that much, isn't it?
I was an adult in the 1990s, but spent most of it going out with friends and getting drunk. Pre-internet, if you couldn't make it to meet up with someone, the person who was waiting would have to ring the person not going from a payphone and ask where they were or ask who answered when they left. People with mobile phones were wankers and yuppies. But if you had a police scanner, you could pick up snippets of conversations on the older mobile phones as the wanker drove past.
I remember those days, too. Meeting friends at bars, just hanging out without any distractions. We relied on payphones to stay connected, which made the whole process kind of interesting. If someone wasn't around, you'd actually have to call and figure things out. Nowadays, it feels different with everyone glued to their phones. Back then, it was just about being present and finding out what was going on in person.
Grunge, old bastard checking in, 90s, early 90s was really like the 80s Cold War was still around, less so as glasnost was kicking in. A big sigh of relief when the wall came down. Around 93 to 94, things started to change very quickly. The mobile cell phone started to have a massive change to the world. The internet began to appear more and more in offices and homes. Dial-up. Music really kicked off. More indie groups were around, fantastic small gigs. The change and anticipation towards the end with the millennium bug / will it, won't it? The panic of companies to be compliant then pop. It ended. Year 2000.
I remember those days too. The music scene was something else. Going to small gigs felt special, like you were part of something before it blew up. The whole tech shift was wild. Suddenly everyone was on dial-up, connecting with the world. I had friends freaking out about the millennium bug, but it all just felt like hype. Then, we hit 2000 and everything seemed to change again. Just a blur now.
Quite good. Music scene in Britain was great. The US really missed out on the whole Britpop thing, not embracing Oasis because Liam's a dick and only getting in a blur late with Song 2. And you really missed out nationally on the whole house / acid house thing at the start of the decade. House prices weren't high enough, yet to put places impossibly beyond your reach. Home consoles, Sega versus Nintendo, 8-bit and 16-bit, then PlayStation versus Xbox versus Nintendo the first time around, had fun games without all the DLC bollocks. I'd enjoy it all again if a time loop sent me 26 years into the past.
I get that. The music scene back then had so much going on. Britpop really had its moment, and you're right about the US missing some key stuff. The gaming side was simple, with just a few consoles battling it out. No microtransactions cluttering the experience. Those days felt more straightforward. It'd be interesting to relive that era if time travel was a thing. Just simpler times all around.
I was 22 when the 90s started. I live in Southern California and remember hip-hop happening, then the riots, then OJ, then Clinton, and then Republicans going over the top in their loathing for him, and that birthing Rush Limbaugh and conservative radio. I was never much of a grunge guy, though it was better than the hair metal that the late 80s spawned. Technology was changing at a crazy rapid pace. I bought my first computer, a 486, somewhere around the mid-90s, and then the internet happened and people tried to figure out what to do with it. And pagers, I remember pagers everywhere. People seriously freaked over the Y2K bug. Then there was the craziness of the Bush/Gore debacle, an early warning of the conservative politics to follow. Then 9/11 happened and things got extra shitty. But what do I know? I was high most of the time.
Those years had a lot going on. I remember the tech boom too, got my first computer around then. The rise of the internet was wild. Pagers were everywhere, and people were really paranoid about Y2K. The political scene was intense, with all the scandals and the build-up to 9/11. It felt like every day was filled with chaos. I guess a lot of us were just trying to keep up, right?
I watched 2 episodes of Rome in a hospital waiting room on my battery power tablet that has more computing power than Cray. I love how you throw in a Cray. I don't think many people realize how far computers have gone, that a tablet is more powerful than supercomputers in the 90s. Not only match it, but more powerful by orders of magnitude.
Yeah, it's wild to think about. Just sitting there, I was really into the show. A hospital waiting room can be pretty boring, but having that kind of tech made it a bit better. It's funny how we expect so much from small devices now. Kind of puts things into perspective, how we've come to rely on gadgets for entertainment even in the most mundane situations.
It completely sucks to not be able to play a game you spent $50 on because you lost the manual and can't figure out what the third word in the second sentence on the 5th page is. There were no walkthroughs on the internet because there was no internet really, so you had to buy a $50 book to play the $50 game. I hadn't thought about this in years, but you're 100% right.
I remember when I got a game like that. Spent money just to stare at it. No guides or anything, just a manual. Losing it made me feel like I wasted my cash. It's wild how much of a difference the internet makes now. Back then, you really had to rely on those booklets. It was frustrating, but part of the experience, I guess. Makes you appreciate things more today.
Music was still pretty awesome because albums were still a thing. Depeche Mode Violator was my soundtrack for the start of the decade. Bands still cared about the entire album and touring to support the album. Radio was still the biggest driver of music, and that was a double-edged sword. If you had a good station, you got to hear stuff you didn't know about. If you didn't, you were stuck with top 40 crap. I like a lot of today's music, but it's so focused on single songs. I miss buying an album and listening to it end to end and feeling like I got 10 to 12 songs that were connected, not one artist version of now. That's what I call music. For all the crap Katy Perry gets, she makes some awesome albums and videos that would have a bean at home in the 90s. This is still totally a thing nowadays, depending on what you listen to. Pretty much all metal is way more about albums than singles.
Yeah, I get that. There was something special about listening to an entire album. I remember getting a CD, popping it in, and just letting it play. You'd discover the flow of the songs, feel the vibe. Nowadays, it feels rushed with all the singles. Some genres, like metal, still keep that album focus though. It's nice that some artists still create that whole experience instead of just chasing hits.
I started 1990 in Russian language school because, of course, everyone knew Russian was the language to learn. Within a year, everyone was going into Arabic, yeah. I went through DLI Russian in 87 to 88 and trained as a SIGINT analyst specializing in waiting for the Red Army to roll through the Fulda Gap. Then in a matter of months, pretty much all our training was rendered useless. In 91, they basically told us to fight to the death amongst ourselves to re-enlist because there were like 10 unneeded Ruski linguists for every open re-up slot. It was nuts. I showed them, though. Laid low for 8 years, and then wavered back into 99 for an easy 4 years of world peace.
That's a wild ride. Starting off with Russian and then shifting gears to Arabic must have felt like a major twist. It's crazy how fast things can change in the military. You put in all that work, and then everything shifts overnight. Waiting for the Red Army to show up, and then suddenly the focus is elsewhere. Smart move sticking back in for a chill 4 years. Sometimes timing just works out.
While getting turn-by-turn directions, and my car tells me exactly how much further I can go before I need gas. My brakes failed, and instead of staying stranded, I just used GPS navigation to give me an idea of how sharp the upcoming blind turns were, so I could downshift in time to not have to use the e-brakes. Made it 15 miles without using the brakes once on unfamiliar back roads at night, thanks to a real-time HUD. The future is pretty crazy.
That sounds like quite the experience. Relying on GPS to navigate those turns must have been nerve-wracking. You had to trust the tech to keep you safe. It's wild how modern tools can help us out in tough situations like that. You definitely tested your driving skills and your car's limits. Glad you made it without incident. Shows how far we've come with technology, even in unexpected circumstances.
I was a teenager in the 80s during the Reagan/Bush Cold War years. I grew up just assuming that at some point there would probably be a WWII nuclear showdown with the Soviet Union. Because I was on the East Coast near New York City and Washington, D.C., I consoled myself that at least I would very likely be vaporized during the first few missile strikes. I felt more sorry for the people who would have lived in the aftermath. It was very strange when the USSR collapsed in 1991. Combination of relief, disbelief, and eventually a realization that maybe the Russians weren't quite the monsters that we were told.
It's interesting how we grew up with those fears. Being on the East Coast and thinking about a quick end must have shaped your perspective. The end of the Cold War brought mixed feelings for many. It's like the narrative we all had was flipped. We had to rethink everything we were told about the enemy. It felt surreal, but it also opened the door for new possibilities.
Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.